If you asked me what the heck this is, I couldn't tell you, but hey, respect to Hoyoverse for always getting creative with their character animations. I'm just excited that I finally get to play as Nijika from Kirara from Genshin Impact. Like Yaoyao, Kirara is a fantastic Dendro survivability option that's surprisingly easy to build. As always, this guide will teach you everything you need to know about Kirara, from her best artifacts and weapons to general playstyle and team compositions. Without further ado, let's get this guide rolling. Kirara's elemental skill is her bread and butter. Tap her skill to swipe in front of her and create a Dendro shield that scales on her max HP. This shield has a 100% uptime since her tap cooldown is 8 seconds and her shield duration is 12 seconds. She also has a hold version of the skill, which you saw at the very beginning of this video, that allows her to transform into a parcel that hits enemies as she moves around, quite similar to Sayu's elemental skill. This hold skill exhibits some basic restrictions, such as you can only hit the same enemy once every 0.5 seconds, and the hold skill's cooldown scales directly with how much time you spend moving around. The only difference here is that Sayu's skill is much faster like Sonic, while Kirara's skill feels like you're a caterpillar narrated by David Attenborough. Jokes aside, it's actually not that slow. Kirara's box moves at about the same speed as your sprint, and because that's not anything crazy like Yelan or Sayu, you may want to think twice before spending too much time in her hold skill outside of exploration purposes. Kirara's hold skill creates the same shield as the tap skill, but with her first ascension talent, hitting enemies while moving around as a package grants her a stack of what the game calls reinforced packaging, up to 3 times before exiting her hold skill. After exiting, Kirara will consume these reinforced packaging stacks to add extra damage absorption to her shield and refresh the duration of her existing shield. Each stack adds 20% of her basic shield's damage absorption, and since her tap shield already has fairly decent damage absorption, the size of her hold skill shield can get pretty ridiculous. With how much Kirara has going for her with her elemental skill, it's no surprise that her elemental burst is about as simple as it gets. Kirara's burst rains down a package from the sky which explodes for AoE dendro damage upon contact with the ground, and then spreads cat-shaped bombs across the battlefield that are quite similar to Klee's mines from her elemental skill. Although the initial hit of Kirara's burst boasts a high damage multiplier, unfortunately, the damage scales with attack just like her skill's damage, while shielding scales with her max HP. You can build her for attack, dendro damage, and crit, since it can be pretty funny to push your Kirara's burst damage as high as you can, but this video will cover her main role as a shielder. Even with her other ascension talent, which boosts the damage of her burst and skill based on every 1000 HP increment that she has, a Kirara shielder build treats her burst damage as a bonus and not a focal point of her kit. The first in-depth topic to cover is energy generation. With Kirara's tap skill, you can generate 3 dendro particles, which is not too shabby. With Kirara's hold skill, you can generate 1 dendro particle when you collide with an enemy, and this can only happen once every 4 seconds. Afterward, once you exit her hold skill, the final hit will also generate 3 dendro particles just like her tap skill. Just like Sayu, players may want to consider briefly holding her skill for an extra dendro particle by colliding into the nearest enemy and then immediately exiting her hold skill to either have Kirara absorb the particles herself or funnel them into the next character depending on what your team needs. Despite Kirara's decent energy generation, using her skill just once per rotation requires her to build a decent amount of energy recharge to get her burst off every rotation, because it's a 60 energy cost burst and not a 40 energy cost burst. Players should aim for around 160% energy recharge if you're looking for a safe benchmark that covers all teams. Of course, running Kirara to support another dendro character can lower this number to around 140% energy recharge, since the 2 dendro characters will generate dendro energy for each other. The other theory crafting topic to cover with Kirara is her dendro application. Specifically, it's worth taking a look at her hold skill again, which only offers a standard internal cooldown of 1 dendro application every 3 hits or 2.5 seconds. This is actually a decent ICD situation because Kirara's hold skill can land hits every 0.5 seconds and isn't shared between enemies, so Kirara's dendro application is pretty on par with a character like Yaoyao. However, there are 2 things to consider that may hold Kirara back. First, spending too much time as a package can be a time waster when enemies are too far away from each other, given that she can't close gaps fast like Yelan or Sayu can. Additionally, during Kirara's hold skill, she cannot take advantage of off-field bursts from characters like Xingqiu or Yolan, which is a much more important point for Dendro characters compared to Anemo characters when considering Bloom teams. Despite her being a Dendro character, this shortcoming will diminish her role as an on-field Bloom creator for Hyper Bloom and Burgeon teams, as well as Nilou Bloom teams, which is a little bit unfortunate. However, at C4, Kirara gains the ability to supply a tiny bit of off-field Dendro application, making her a lot more suited for these teams. Kirara's C4 performs a coordinated attack that deals Dendro damage when a character protected by her Dendro shield lands a hit with a normal charge or plunge attack. This coordinated attack counts as elemental burst damage and can only occur once every 3.8 seconds, meaning that it will apply Dendro every time it hits. C4 is definitely one of Kirara's best constellations because it just helps her fit into more teams for more than just defensive purposes, but keep in mind that this is definitely not something that will outshine the other off-field Dendro options. As for Kirara's other potent constellation, it has to be Constellation 6. C6 will grant the party 12% elemental damage bonus for 15 seconds when Kirara uses her burst. Given that Kirara's burst has a cooldown of 15 seconds, this buff theoretically has a 100% uptime if you cast your burst off cooldown. Again, Kirara's C6 won't outshine other elemental damage supports, but gives her another piece of utility that contributes to offensive support, which is something that her base kit lacks at C0. As for C1 and C2, these are just okay constellations with niche uses. C2 is a great constellation if you're a frequent co-op player since it grants a smaller shield to allies you collide with, but otherwise it's nothing worth chasing. The great thing about Kirara is that regardless of her constellations, her shielder build is very intuitive and doesn't change at all. For the strongest shields, Kirara's best artifact set is the 2-set Tenacity of the Millilith, plus the new 2-set Voruksha's Glow, which both offer 20% HP set bonuses. To give Kirara some offensive support capabilities, players may also want to consider the 4-set Noblesse Oblige if they can build enough HP for her shield without these set bonuses. Kirara is pretty good at providing the 20% attack buff from Noblesse, given that the buff lasts for 12 seconds and her burst only has a 15-second cooldown. Those two artifact combinations are your go-to sets, but there's also another option to consider. The 4-set Deepwood Memories is a fantastic support set for Spread and Bloom teams, but only finds its true value with Kirara's C4. At C0, Kirara lacks the ability to reapply the 4-set effect after switching out without her C4's off-field Dendro application, so unless you use her tap skill off cooldown, expect a couple of seconds of downtime on the Dendro Red Shred. As for artifact stats, Kirara wants HP or energy recharge in the Sands, HP in the Goblet, and HP in the Circlet. Remember that if you want to use Kirara's burst every rotation, total energy recharge should be around the 140 to 160% benchmark that I outlined in the Theorycrafting section, depending on how much time she spends on field and who her teammates are. Oftentimes, an energy recharge sword plus a few energy recharge substats will get you comfortably in this range, so an HP stance is pretty easy to justify for Kirara. Speaking of weapons, Kirara's weapons end up being mostly energy recharge options given the lack of HP swords. Kirara's best option and only option that provides HP as a main stat is the Key of Khaj Nisut. This sword is a premium 5-star option for the strongest shields and ability to buff the elemental mastery of the party based on the wielder's max HP. Kirara is one of the few users of this weapon that can reliably activate the weapon's elemental mastery buff as long as she spends a few seconds in her hold skill to deal elemental skill damage as the passive outlines. Kirara's second best sword is Favonius Sword, which serves as the best generalist option for support. The ability to generate clear energy particles for the team is invaluable given how many characters nowadays have energy problems. Additionally, the massive energy recharge stat allows Kirara to ignore energy recharge in artifact substats, allowing you to chase more HP for stronger shields. Your completely free-to-play option is the Sumeru craftable Sapwood Blade, which provides a small energy recharge main stat and can also provide a small EM buff to the character that picks up the leaf generated by the sword's passive. These three swords are the main options for Kirara, but there are also a lot of alternatives that have niche uses. Players with extra 5-star sword copies can run either Primordial Jade Cutter for fantastic crit rate and damage, or Freedom Sworn for its potential as a support weapon for hyper carries. Other energy recharge options like Skyrider Sword, Sacrificial Sword, Festering Desire, or Skyward Blade can all work simply for their high energy recharge stats, but pale in comparison to Favonius Sword or Sapwood Blade. Moving into the final section of this video, we have Kirara's best teams. There's one team in particular that Kirara shines in regardless of her constellation status, and that's spread teams. Kirara functions best as a defensive option and energy battery for Alhaitham or Tighnari, both of which provide remarkable dendro damage with spread reactions. For the other two team slots outside of this pairing, you're going to want an off-field Electro DPS plus a flex slot. The off-field DPS is most often Fischl or Raiden Shogun due to how flexible their elemental skills are and how they can function as a solo Electro character without energy problems. Other popular off-field Electro DPS characters are Beidou or Yae Miko, while the off-field Electro healers are Kuki Shinobu and Dori. For the flex slot, you can choose another Electro character out of any of the options I mentioned previously if you need the Electro Resonance for energy, or choose an off-field Hydro Applicator for the occasional Hyperbloom reactions. Hydro characters like Barbara and Kokomi are purely defensive but provide a fantastic buff for Alhaitham or Tighnari with the Thrilling Tales of Dragon Slayer's Catalyst. Meanwhile, characters like Xingqiu or Yelan have stellar off-field hydro damage and synergy with Alhaitham, who uses a lot of normal attacks with his Dendro Infusion. And before we move on, everything I've discussed about spread teams also apply to Aggravate teams aside from maybe Cyno due to the conflict of his long field time and Kirara's short cooldowns. You can replace Alhaitham and Tighnari with Electro carries like Razor, Keqing, Yae Miko, or Raiden, and find just as much success with Kirara as your defensive backbone, and also add Animo characters like Kazuha or Sucrose in the last slot to swirl Electro with the Forset Viridescent Veneer artifact set. Nilou and Kirara sorta have a love-hate relationship when it comes to their pairing. On one hand, Kirara's shield is wonderful for protecting the active character, and she even has potential as an on-field character with her elemental skill. On the other hand, on-fielding Kirara for Dendro application with her package completely limits the usage of fast hydro application from Xingqiu or Yelan, forcing you to use other sources of off-field hydro application. Therefore, if you want to on-field a Kirara with her hold skill, your team should add in either Ayato or Kokomi as a hydro applicator even if they're slower, because they don't require the active character to attack. The last slot should use a second off-field Dendro applicator that's either Nahida if you have her or Dendro MC as the free option. This specific setup is your best option for seeing Kirara on the field as much as possible. Note that having Kirara C4 occasionally provides extra Dendro application, making the off-field shielder playstyle much more potent for Nilou Bloom, allowing you to forego Kirara's hold skill and open up the option to run Xingqiu or Yelan. With that, let me know your thoughts, builds, and teams for Kirara down in the comments below. If you enjoyed this guide or thought it was useful, be sure to support both the video and the channel. You can follow me on Twitch, Instagram, TikTok, or sub to the YouTube channel, whatever people do nowadays. Other than that, it's the same as always. I'll see y'all in the next one. Peace.